What if your $180 cholesterol pill could be only $15 today? That's an 82% discount. Generic versions cost just 18% of brand name prices, and the Food and Drug Administration finds 99% of them bioequivalent, all while avoiding costly Phase 3 trials. If you keep paying brand name prices, you could waste more than $1,200 a year on each prescription, money that could fund a vacation or help pay down family debt. Stay tuned. I'll reveal how competition creates an 80% price drop and how you can claim that savings for yourself. What if you could slash your prescription bill by 8/10 with a single, simple switch? Imagine opening a pharmacy receipt and seeing a $180 reduction in your monthly cost. That's $2,160 a year back in your pocket, just like Maria did when she swapped her brand name heart medication for a generic. Prescription drug spending is the fastest growing line item in the average American household budget, rising 7% last year alone. Yet the generic version of the same drug typically costs only 18% of the brand price, an 82% discount that translates into billions of dollars saved nationwide. The Inflation Reduction Act is already tightening the screws on brand-only pricing, and a surge in consumer searches for generic price shows people are hungry for a cheaper alternative. In the next few minutes, you'll learn exactly why that 80% gap exists, how competition drives it deeper, and what myths keep you from taking advantage of it. We'll walk through a quick myth-busting quiz, then dive straight into the first secret: how generics get approved in a fraction of the time it takes brand drugs. Let's uncover the shortcut to approval and see how it fuels those massive savings. Imagine a drug that skips years of trials and lands on pharmacy shelves in under a year. The secret is the Food and Drug Administration's abbreviated New Drug Application, or ANDA. Instead of reinventing the wheel, a generic sponsor only has to prove bioequivalence, a single pharmacokinetic study that shows the generic's peak concentration and overall exposure fall within 80% to 125% of the brand's values. No Phase 3 trials, no thousands of patients, just 20 to 30 healthy volunteers, and a tight 90% confidence interval. Because the science is streamlined, the average review clock shrinks to about 10 months from filing to approval, compared with 7 to 10 years for a brand new molecule. The filing fee is $300,000, and the whole development cost averages roughly $4 million, less than 2% of the $2 to $3 billion a new drug typically requires. Over 2,500 FDA inspections happen each year, and 99% of facilities pass on the first try. Underscoring that speed does not mean a loss of safety. Real-world examples illustrate the pace. Lipitor's first generic, filed in August 2009, cleared the FDA in March 2011, and hit shelves in just 19 months, slashing the price from $180 a month to $15, a 92% drop. The EpiPen generic followed a similar 17-month path, delivering a 65% price reduction, despite the added device component. Even biosimilars, like the first adalimumab copy, navigated a 16-month approval window, cutting the monthly cost by roughly a third. These numbers translate into a median generic price that's about 18% of the brand, meaning patients save roughly 80% on their prescriptions. That massive gap isn't magic. It's the result of a stripped-down development pipeline combined with intense market competition. But there's a hidden factor that determines just how low that price can go, and we'll see it later. Now that you see why generics move so fast, let's break down the math that turns a $1,200 brand into a $200 copy. Here's the math that shows why a pill can cost $1,200, while the exact same molecule can be made for just $200. When a brand name drug reaches the market, the $200 annual price isn't mostly the chemistry. Roughly 30%, $360, covers research and development, and that figure includes the billions spent on compounds that never make it to patients. Another 15%, $180, goes to the costly Phase 3 clinical trials required for a new molecular entity. Marketing and sales consume a quarter of the price. Another $300, as companies pour money into television spots, physician detailing, and direct-to-consumer ads. Patent and legal work, especially evergreening strategies, add $120, while a modest profit margin accounts for the final $180. Manufacturing the active ingredient and the finished product is the smallest slice, only $60. Add those pieces together, and you get the $1,200 brand name cost. Strip out the research, trial, marketing, and legal expenses, and the same drug can be produced and sold for about $200, an 80% reduction. As Dr. Peter Bach says, the 80% price gap is not magic. It's the result of a stripped-down development pipeline and intense market competition. The numbers aren't just theory. Take Lipitor, the cholesterol blockbuster that once cost $180 a month. Once 4 or more generic manufacturers entered, the price collapsed to $15 a month, a 92% saving. Januvia followed a similar pattern, $400 down to $80 when 4 firms competed. But when competition is thin, the discount is modest. The EpiPen's first generic, offered by only 2 manufacturers, still fetched $210 for a 2-pack, only a 65% cut. The number of manufacturers matters. With 3 or more, prices typically fall 70% or more. With 1 or 2, they stay near the brand level. You might wonder whether generics are less safe. The Food and Drug Administration requires bioequivalence within an 80 to 125% confidence window for key pharmacokinetic measures, and 99% of generic facilities pass inspection. Inactive fillers can differ, but fewer than 1% of patients experience any clinically relevant effect. All of this explains the headline-grabbing $1,200 versus $200 math. But there's a loophole that lets some companies keep prices high even after generics appear. A strategy we'll unpack in just a moment. Now that we've dissected where the 80% gap comes from, let's turn to the next puzzle. Why certain generics still cost a lot, and how competition, evergreening, and pharmacy benefit managers shape those prices. Here's where the story gets messy. A generic that looks cheap on paper can still cost you almost as much as the brand. When a drug first loses its patent, the price drop hinges on how many manufacturers jump in. With only 1 or 2 producers, the generic usually sits at about 70% of the brand's price. Add a third, and the discount deepens, but it's the 4th entrant that really drives the needle. Prices plunge to roughly 20% of the original. That's why a drug like Januvia, which went from $400 a month to $80 once 4 generic firms entered, shows the power of competition. But competition isn't always there. About 30% of drugs that lose patent protection are followed by an authorized generic or a slight reformulation that extends market exclusivity by 1 to 5 years. The brand company essentially masquerades as a generic, capturing a slice of the market while keeping prices high. In the case of the EpiPen, the first authorized generic entered at 65% of the brand price and stayed there for 5 years because only 1 independent competitor ever showed up. Pay-for-delay settlements add another layer. Roughly 45% of those agreements grant an extra 2+ years of exclusivity, meaning the generic never even gets a chance to compete. Even when a true generic finally lands, the pharmacy benefit manager in the middle can inflate the net cost. Spread pricing adds $10 to $30 per prescription, and rebates, averaging 12% of the list price, often stay with the manager instead of the patient. So a $20 generic on the label can end up costing an insurer $30 before it reaches you. Supply chain shocks also matter. Active ingredient shortages in 2022 and 2023 pushed prices up 15 to 25% for a fifth of U.S. generics, proving that cheap isn't a guarantee. And if you compare across borders, U.S. generics are 2 to 3 times more expensive than in Canada and up to 15 times pricier than in India, even after adjusting for purchasing power. All these forces, limited manufacturers, evergreening tricks, pay-for-delay deals, pharmacy benefit manager spread pricing, and global supply dynamics, explain why some generics stay stubbornly high. Keep this in mind, because the next part will reveal the policy levers that could finally break these cycles and show you how to lock in real savings. Now let's look ahead at the reforms on the horizon, the role of biosimilars, and the concrete steps you can take to capture those discounts. Here's where the policy puzzle finally clicks into place, and the savings you've been waiting for become realistic. The Inflation Reduction Act puts a hard ceiling on Medicare Part D brand drug price hikes, no more than 15% a year. That alone stops the annual price shock many seniors see on their statements. But the act goes farther. If a drug tries to jump past that limit, or if a generic or biosimilar appears, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services can launch a price review and force a cut of up to 30% of the excess. This creates a powerful regulatory lever that pushes manufacturers to lower prices sooner and clears the way for faster generic entry. In fact, drugs under review now move through the abbreviated new drug application process in about 6 months instead of the usual 10, and early models suggest that applying this to the 50 highest-cost drugs could save Medicare roughly $250 billion by 2030, a part of a potential trillion-dollar reduction across the whole health system. Now, let's talk biosimilars, the cheap biologics that are finally catching up. The first adalimumab biosimilar hit the market in 2023 at $3,300 a month versus Humira's $5,200, a 36% drop. Across 2024, 12 new biosimilars were approved, pushing the share of biologics that have a cheaper counterpart from 12% to about 30%. On average, biosimilars are priced 20 to 40% below their reference products, and the FDA's new Fast Track pilot aims to shave the typical 5 to 7 year lag down to 2 years. If that acceleration holds, biosimilars could capture 35% of the U.S. biologics market by 2030, unlocking $120 to $150 billion in savings. All of this sounds promising, but you might wonder how to turn policy into pocket-level dollars today. First, always ask for the generic name. Pharmacists can switch instantly if a generic is on the formulary. Second, use price comparison apps like GoodRx or Blink Health. They often reveal 80% or more price gaps that you can negotiate at the counter. Third, check your Medicare Part D plan each year. A move to a plan that places your drug in Tier 1 can shave hundreds or even thousands of dollars off your annual bill. Fourth, ask your doctor about biosimilar alternatives. Many physicians are now comfortable prescribing them, especially under Medicare step therapy rules. Fifth, keep an eye on Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services price review announcements. When a drug you take is flagged, the brand may be forced to cut its price overnight. And finally, consider manufacturer assistance programs that can provide free or low-cost versions if you qualify. Behind the scenes, new technology is speeding everything up. Blockchain pilots are already tracking active ingredient shipments, reducing shortage-driven price spikes by about 5%. The FDA's generic Fast Track pilot is cutting review times to 6 months for high-impact drugs, and artificial intelligence-driven bioequivalence modeling is slashing development costs, which could be passed on as lower prices. All these pieces, policy caps, accelerated reviews, biosimilar rollouts, and emerging technology, are converging on a single timeline that could deliver $1 trillion in avoided spending by 2030. Keep that big picture in mind, because the next step shows exactly how you can lock in those savings right now. And coming up next, we'll wrap it all together with a quick checklist you can start using today to make sure you never overpay for a prescription again. So let's bring it all together. When a brand-name drug hits the market, it carries a massive price tag, about $1,000 per patient each year, because the company has to recoup research, clinical trials, marketing, patent battles, and a healthy profit margin. A generic skips most of that heavy lifting. Its total cost is roughly $200 per patient per year, which translates to a price that's only about 18% of the brand. In plain terms, generics are on average 82% cheaper. Why does the discount get even deeper when more manufacturers join the market? The data are clear. With 4 or more producers, a generic can fall to just 20% of the original price. With only 1 or 2, the savings shrink dramatically, sometimes leaving you paying 70% of the brand cost. That's why drugs like the EpiPen generic still feel pricey. There simply aren't enough competitors. There are a few loopholes that keep some generics from delivering the full 80% cut. Evergreening strategies, authorized generics, or new formulations that extend exclusivity affect roughly 30% of drugs that lose patent protection. And the pharmacy benefit managers' spread pricing can add another 10 to 30% to what you actually pay at the counter, even after rebates. But the overwhelming majority of generics deliver massive savings. A single patient who switched from a brand cholesterol pill at $180 a month to its generic at $15 saves nearly $2,000 a year. Multiply that across millions of prescriptions, and the United States could shave off close to $1 trillion in drug spending by 2030 if competition continues to drive prices down to 15% of brand levels. Now it's your turn. In the comments, tell us the biggest prescription you've ever saved on. Your story could be featured in our next video. If this breakdown helped you see why generics are typically around 80% cheaper, give the video a thumbs up. And don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell, because coming up next we'll dive into the next frontier of savings: how biosimilars could cut the cost of life-saving biologics by half. Remember, the more you know about the forces shaping drug prices, the better you can protect your wallet. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next episode.